We've learned about several different types of values and units in CSS, but we haven't really discussed color yet. So far, we've just used color keywords like red or blue. But I have a feeling you're more creative than that, and you want to live in a world of digital color. There are a few different ways we can define colors using CSS, but we're going to learn about hexadecimal colors in this project. That looks and sounds complicated at first, so let's walk through it slowly. Hexadecimal is a base 16 numbering system rather than the base 10 number system that you're used to. After we count from 0 to 9, we run out of our traditional numeric values and move on to the letters A, B, C, D, E, and F, which represent the numbers 10 through 15 as a single digit or character. So if we start counting at 0, that's 16 possibilities for each place. Now, in our normal base 10 numbering system, we can combine two of the numerals 0 through 9 for a total of 10 possible values in each place. If we multiply the number of possible values in each place together, we get a total of 100 possible numbers, which represents 0 through 99. Now, if we combine the two hexadecimal values together in the same way we're used to combining the numerals 0 through 9, we can create 256 values instead of 100. That's because each number is 16 digits, and 16 multiplied by 16 is 256. When we write hexadecimal colors, there's a place for red, green, and blue, which are the three colors we can combine to make any color on a digital screen. Each of these three colors consists of two hexadecimal numbers for a total of 6 places. The first two numbers are for red, the second two are for green, and the last two are for blue. The higher each of these values are, the more of that color will be mixed in. So, for example, a hex value of all zeros would be pure black, and a hex value of all Fs would be pure white. A number in the middle, like all 8s, would represent a middle gray. These values start with a hash or a pound sign to denote that they're hexadecimal values. We're going to create a green color using the value 6AB47B. If we break this down, the first pair of values is a medium amount of red, the second two values are a high amount of green, and the last two values are a medium amount of blue. So, with our knowledge of hexadecimal colors, let's try one out. I'm going to create some space to work here and just skip down our CSS file a little bit. And right here, I'm going to select an anchor element. Actually, this is going to be all the anchor elements on our page. And I'm going to use the color property, and I'm going to apply a hexadecimal value of 6AB47B. And if we hover over that hexadecimal value, you can see that workspaces will automatically show us what that color looks like. Now, I want all of the links on my site to be green, but throughout this project, you should pick the colors that you like. In fact, you'll see me type hexadecimal colors like this pretty quickly. It's not because I'm magically able to type out these colors from memory. It's because I've already picked them out. When picking colors, you'll need to take some time experimenting, possibly in an image editing tool like Photoshop. I'm going to select our header and add 2 new declarations. Let's go ahead and select our header. And we'll use the background property. And I'm going to type in the same color that we used here. Actually, I can just copy and paste it, just like that. And then I'm going to add a border color, which is a property we haven't seen before. And I'm going to add a new color here, which is 599A68, and that should do it. Now I'm going to go ahead and save the page and refresh over here. And as you can see, our header is now green. However, it has the same color as our links, so they're disappearing. And we'll go ahead and fix that in just a moment. I'd also like you to notice that there isn't a border really appearing just yet, but we'll use that border color later on. Now, let's go ahead and fix the color of those headlines. To do that, I'm going to use a new selector here, and I'll explain this in just a minute. So an H1 with a comma, followed by an H2. And I'm going to set the color to white. Now, let's take a look at this syntax because I've done two new things here. First, I've styled both our H1 and our H2 elements in the same style rule. The comma between two elements will break them into two separate selectors here. So this is actually separating selectors, and I could have, say, a descendant selector here, so I could just select an anchor element if it appeared inside of the H1, just like that, and it would separate it from my second selector here. So we're selecting the H1, and separately we're selecting the H2, but we're applying the same set of style rules to them. Second, I've used some hexadecimal shorthand here, and I've only used 3 digits instead of the normal 6. In this case, each digit will be used as both digits for each color. In other words, this is equivalent to filling out all 6 numbers with these values. Of course, these are the highest values possible, and I've applied it to all colors, so that will give us a white color. Using shorthand for the hexadecimal and for the selectors here is just a way to save a little bit of time and increase the clarity of your code. Just to make sure you understand, the code you see here would be equivalent to the following. If I were to type out an H1 and set it to the color white, just like that, with our normal 6 hexadecimal digits, and then if I copied that and pasted it and set that to an H2, all of this code here is exactly equivalent to this code right here. It's doing the exact same thing. So this is much shorter than typing out everything in longhand. Now, let's go ahead and save this out, switch over to the browser, and refresh here. And as you can see, we now have our headlines visible. However, our navigation is still here, and it's not visible. So if I highlight the page here, you can just barely make out these navigation links, which you can't see. So I want our navigation to have a slightly darker green background on mobile devices, similar to the border color that we'll use later on. So let's go ahead and grab that border color, just like that. And then we need to select our navigation, which we haven't done yet. So let's make a new selector. And we'll say background, and then paste in that color we just copied, and end it with a semicolon. So let's go ahead and save that, switch back to our preview and refresh. And as you can see, we have a slightly darker background applied, but our navigation links still aren't very visible. There's not very much contrast there. So we want to change those to white as well so that they're extra visible. So in order to do that, let's go ahead and create another selector here that will select the anchor elements inside of our nav. And we're going to set the color, once again, to white, just like that. So far, so good. However, we want these colors to stay white no matter what, even if the site visitor has already visited them. To do that, we're going to create another selector in this same rule using a comma, and we're going to select the anchor elements again. Now, what we want to do here is add what's called a pseudo class to our second anchor element, or our second selector here. It's not a real class in our HTML, but it's basically a state that the element can be put into under the right conditions. So let's go ahead and add a pseudo class. I'm going to type a colon here, and then I'm going to type the word visited. So this is the visited pseudo class. I'm going to save that out, and if we go to our preview and refresh the page, you can see that all of these links are white, and even if I click here and go back, they still remain white, even if they've been visited. Now, there's a few more things we should do for our nav links. Specifically, we should make it obvious which page the visitor is currently on by selecting and highlighting the current nav link. We'll do this by jumping back into our markup. So we'll go into our HTML here, and we'll add an attribute called a class. Now, I just mentioned a class, but I didn't explain what it is. So a class is similar to an ID, but the difference is that you can have multiples of the same class on a page. All IDs, however, must be unique and cannot be repeated on a single page. So let's go ahead and add that class, and I'm going to add it to index.html, or the portfolio link here, because that's the page that we're currently on. And I'm going to say class, and I'm going to apply the class selected. Now, just like IDs, this can be anything you want. This isn't a predefined class. This is just a class I made up. So we'll need to apply some styling to match it in our CSS. We could have used an ID in this particular instance, but adding a class will give us greater flexibility in case there is a strange navigational situation where we want multiple selections. In this case, we've applied the selected class to our homepage link. This will indicate to the site visitor which page they're currently on. So let's save that and then jump into our CSS and utilize this class. So I'm going to create a new rule here and say nav a, and then apply the class. And to do that, we use dots. We'll say dot selected, and then we'll open up the rule here. So basically, any anchor element that's inside of our nav that has the class selected applied to it will get these style declarations. So we're just going to apply a color here, and I'm going to type out a new color, and the value will be 32 for red, 67 for the green, and 3F for the blue. So RGB. Now, you've seen a few hexadecimal colors so far. So without hovering over this, I want you to try and guess what this color might be. Have you guessed it? I'm going to hover over, and you guessed dark green. That's correct. It's very similar to our other colors that we've been applying previously. So once again, just to review, if there's an anchor element with the class selected applied, it will get this dark green color. I want to also apply this dark green color to the hover state, which is another pseudo class similar to visited. So let's go ahead and break apart this selector into two selectors and say nav, anchor, and then apply the pseudo class hover. So anytime we hover over this link with our cursor, it will change to this particular color. What does that mean? Well, let's save this and go back to our preview and refresh and see what it looks like. As you can see, the portfolio text is a darker color now, and that's because the selected class has been applied. And if I hover my cursor over the other links here, you'll see that the hover state activates and changes the color. Pretty cool. The last thing I want to style is the background color and text color of our body element, which basically encapsulates the entire website. We'll set the background to white and the text color to gray. That will make the text feel a little less harsh because it will have slightly lower contrast. So let's switch back to our CSS, and I'll scroll down here. I'm going to type body, and then I'm going to say background color. I'm going to set it to white. Of course, this is white by default, but we want to make sure that no other styling overrides that for some strange reason. We want to make absolutely sure that our background color is the color that we want it to be. And then I'm going to set the text color using the color property. And I'm going to apply another shorthand hexadecimal value. Now, once again, I want you to try and guess what this color is going to be. And it's going to be this gray color. So let's go ahead and save that, switch over to our preview and refresh. And if we scroll down the page here to where we have some text, you can see that it is now this light gray color. Those are most of the colors that we'll use on our website. Later on, we'll add color in a few more places. Before we continue, let's review what we've learned. Our web page is starting to take shape. Adding some color has certainly made it a bit more interesting. Now, we're going to spend some time learning about how to set font sizes and then include custom fonts from a third-party service. Before we begin, we should organize our CSS a bit. It's starting to get complex, and I don't want you to lose track of where we're at. To organize things, we're going to add some CSS comments. A comment is basically a way for us to write a note in the code without it actually being interpreted by the browser. Site visitors won't be able to see these comments on the site either, unless they view the source of your web page. It's a good idea to keep your code well commented because comments can serve as reminders or visual cues about your thought process when writing code. This makes it much easier to maintain your code later on and fix bugs if you need to. So let's go ahead and write our first comment. Down here on the site body, I'm going to write a / and then a star, and on my keyboard, I just have to hit Shift and the number 8, although that might be different on your keyboard. And then inside of this, I'm going to type site body. And I can type whatever I want here because this isn't going to be interpreted by the browser. So if I save this and refresh the page, it shouldn't change anything at all. So again, the syntax is a / a star, or an asterisk, and then we write our comment inside of here, and then we close the comment with a star and another /. So you'll see that the opening and closing remarks here are actually opposite one another. Comments don't necessarily have to be on their own line either. We could put comments alongside the end of a line of code. So for example, I could copy this comment and I could put it right here. And it's not going to affect the code in any way. Now, let's go ahead and comment the rest of the colors that we added previously. So, up here for our header, we want to say that this is going to be a green header, and this will help us remember what colors we put here. And I'm just going to copy this comment and just edit its contents so we can type a little bit faster here. Just above our navigation, I'm going to say that this is the nav background on mobile devices. Right here, this is the logo text, so let's type that, logo text. We've also colored our links here, so let's type that out. And then we also have our nav links. So let's say that this is the color for a nav link. And then finally, we have the selected nav link color. So let's type that out. Selected nav link. Great. Now, normally we wouldn't add a comment to every single CSS rule, but in this case, it will make it easier for us to change the color scheme. I strongly encourage you to come up with a color scheme of your own to get more practice with CSS colors. Now, let's create a few multi-line comments to help break up our code into readable chunks. So, what does that look like? Well, let's head up to the top of our code here, and I'm going to open a comment and then close it, and I'm going to type out a bunch of stars here, or asterisks. And then I can do the same thing down here, and inside of this, I can type a word like general. This first section I've labeled general because it's some very basic styling that applies site-wide at a fairly pervasive level. As you can see, this is a perfectly valid comment because it starts and ends with an opening and closing slash and an asterisk at each side. Now, I actually want to include a very specific number of asterisks here, just sort of as a point of style. So I'm going to copy some code from off screen here and then paste it in. And you can add however many you'd like, however you would like your code to look. And so that's something that's totally up to you. Now I'm going to copy this, and I want to add another one of these just above our header. So let's just do that, and we'll call this one header. And I usually like to have 3 spaces before each one of these. So I'll do that. And actually, I think I want to call that heading instead of header. There we go. And finally, I'm going to add one down here towards the bottom. And I'm going to call this colors. So that will go just above all of the colors that we've added here. And we have some other styling up here, and we need to kind of reorganize our CSS a little bit. So I'm going to move this link color further down. So I'll put that just after the H1 and H2 here. That's good. And let's see, this navigation actually kind of comes a little bit sooner in the page. So I just want to do that. And then I also want to keep all of these links together just like that. Actually, I think I'm going to put the site body up at the top here, just so that it's consistent and kind of has the site body as the first thing in our list of colors, since that's the most broad selector that we have. And then we need to move, let's see, our logo here underneath our heading. And again, I like to have 3 spaces before the start of one of these multi-line comments. So we'll do that. And then I think we can leave our general styles alone. And I think in our general styles, I'm going to just flip the wrapper and this anchor element around. There we go. Now, this should have a very minimal effect on the outcome of the site. So if you don't rearrange these things as I have done, your site should probably work the same. But again, because of CSS's cascading nature, you may want to go ahead and rearrange them as I've done. So just to review, under the general section, we have the wrapper ID and our anchor selector. Under the heading, we have our logo ID selector. And then under colors, we have our body colors, header colors, navigation colors, H1 and H2, anchor colors, and then nav A and nav visited colors, and then the selected and hover states. Now our code is a lot more readable and scannable. We can just scroll up and down the page here, and we can see where these major blocks are located. So let's go ahead and include a font now. So I'm going to head over to my favorite third-party font service, which is google.com/fonts. There are many font services like this one, but I like Google the best because it's completely free. All of the fonts are legitimate and properly licensed, The hosting is extremely fast and reliable, and lately, their selection has become very broad. I already know which fonts I'm going to use, but you can go ahead and browse through the selection here and use the filters over on the left-hand side to choose a font that you like best. So I'm going to go ahead and type in Changa 1, I believe is how you pronounce that. And I'm going to click Add to Collection. And then there's another font that I want called Open Sans. So I'm going to type that in, and here we have Open Sans, and I'm going to add that to my collection as well. With both fonts chosen, I'm ready to use them in my site. So I'll click this button down at the bottom that says Use. Now, I may want to use some variations of these fonts, so I'm going to grab a few by checking these boxes. So I want normal, 400, and italic there, and then 700 for bold, and 700 for bold and italic as well. And let's see here. I also want to get extra bold 800. Great. Now, let's scroll down to the box that says, add this code to your website, and copy the link element that you see here. So let's go ahead and highlight this, copy it, and then we'll go back to our code. And we want to go to our index file here. And you may have noticed that the code we're copying looks very similar to the link elements that we've created ourselves. That's because Google is actually giving us a CSS file here that includes our fonts. Now, it's very important that this CSS file gets pasted in just below your normalize, but just above your main. So again, you want your fonts to come in below normalize.css, but above your custom CSS. That's because we're going to be referring to our fonts inside of our custom CSS, and if we put it below our custom CSS, it won't know what we're talking about. So let's save that, and then go into main.css, and actually apply one of our fonts to the first level headline using the font family property. So inside of our heading here, let's skip down a little bit and select an H1. And then let's say font family. And we need to use single quotes and say Changa 1 for the name of the font. And then we'll put a comma and follow that up with sans -serif and end it with a semicolon. So let's go over this syntax again. You'll notice that we put the name of our font in single quotes, and it's important that we use the exact name of our font. And in fact, Google tells you exactly how to do that here. And it's suggesting we use cursive. We're actually just going to use sans serif as our fallback. So let's take a look at that again. After the font is in quotes, we have a comma, and we follow it up with sans-serif without the quotes. We're adding this so that in the unlikely event of Google Fonts going down or this font no longer being available, the font will fall back to the generic sans serif font and it will still look decent. Now, let's save our CSS file if you haven't already done so and refresh to see what this looks like. As you can see, I now have this font being applied to my first level headline. While we're working on this H1, let's set a font size and add the rest of our styling to it. So I'm going to skip down here and set a margin of 15 pixels and then 0 pixels, so 15 on the top and bottom, and 0 on the left and right, and then a font size of 1.75 ems. Let's explain the easy part here first. Like I said, The margin has spacing above and below the element, but I don't want any on the left and right, so I've left that blank. Then I've set a font size of 1.75 ems. This is a new unit that we haven't encountered before, and it may look a little bit confusing at first, but we're going to use it frequently, so we'd better understand it. Ems are a relative unit of measurement, and they get their name from the capital letter M, or the size of the letter M. Strange, I know. Pixels are probably a slightly more familiar unit if you're used to sizing fonts in Photoshop or a word processor and other similar tools. 1 em is equivalent to the current font size, which in most browsers is set to 16 pixels by default. So we're basically adjusting the font size relative to 16 pixels. That means that 1 em is the font size, 16 pixels by default. In this case, we've set a first-level headline to the size of 1.75, which is 0.75 larger relative to the default size. So it's basically a multiplier. Let's save this and refresh the page to see what that looks like. As you can see, we've set it to a slightly smaller font size in this case, because actually the default size for a headline is larger by default. There are many reasons to use a relative unit like ems instead of an absolute unit like pixels, but in summary, they're just better suited to the cascading nature of CSS. It's much easier to make fast and powerful changes with a relative unit of measurement rather than setting it with pixels and being very explicit. If that doesn't make much sense, don't worry about it right now. We're going to use this much more in the rest of this project, and you'll see many more examples, and it should start to make sense over time. Now, let's continue. I'm going to set the font weight to normal. So font weight is going to be normal. So this will basically unbold our headline because headline elements are bold by default. And then I'm going to set the line height to 0.8 ems. Now, the line height property determines the amount of space between each line of text. This is more important in paragraph text, and actually it's more apparent in paragraph text, but we want to adjust the spacing here as well. Again, we're using relative ems as the unit here. Now, let's style our second level headline, and I'm going to type out the code and then explain it after I'm done typing. So font size is going to be 0.75 ems. The margin is going to be -5 pixels, 0, and then 0. So we're using 3 values there. And then the font weight is going to be normal. So what does all this mean? Well, the font size and font weight should be familiar to you. The font weight being set to normal will basically unbold our text like we just did previously, and we'll see what that looks like in a moment. And then the font size is set to 0.75 ems, so that will make the font size actually pretty small because remember this is a multiplier. But the new thing I've done here is set a negative margin, and I've also set 3 values for the margin instead of 2 like we've been using previously. The first value here sets the top. The second value sets the left and right, and the third value sets the bottom. In other words, this element only has margins applied to the top. This negative value that we're applying to the top will actually pull the element closer to the other elements around it, rather than pushing it away. This is a common technique when you want elements to be tighter together, especially when you're styling typography. We're going to do more styling throughout, but let's finish up some more font-related stuff. So I'm going to save that out, and up here, I'm going to select the body element once again. So let's come up to the top here and select our body again. And we've already selected our body down in our colors, but I want this to be separate from our colors and easy to read, so we're going to create a second body selector here. And we're going to apply the other font we picked out, which is Open Sans, and we're going to fall back to Sans Serif if for some reason Open Sans isn't available. This will set everything on the site to use Open Sans because we're applying it to the body, with the exception of our first level headline, which has another font applied to it and is more specific than the body, so it will be overridden for that one element. This is a good example of how cascading in CSS works. To wrap this up, we're going to style the navigation section and the footer. We're not going to use any new properties or techniques. Instead, I want you to try and follow along and understand what we're doing. So, let's go ahead and create a new section here by copying our multi-line comment. And let's scroll down here, and I'm going to put a new multi-line comment just after our H2 there, and I'm going to call this navigation. And then I'm going to select our nav element here, and we already have a selector for this, but again, that's selecting colors, and I want to keep that separate in this particular project, but you could put them together if you'd like. I'm going to align the text center in our nav. I'm going to set some padding on the top and bottom to 10 pixels and 0 on the left and right. And then I'm going to apply some margin to the top, but I want everything else to be 0 for our navigation. Now I'm going to select this multi-line comment once again, and just after our navigation here, I'm going to create a new one for the footer. And I'm going to select our footer, and then we're going to create some declarations inside of our rule here. So we're going to set the font size to 0.75 ems, so the font in our footer will be relatively small. We're going to set the text alignment to be center once again. We're going to set the padding on the top to 50 pixels, so we are actually using a new property here, padding top, which is just another way of specifying that we only want padding on the top. And then finally, we're going to set the color to this very light gray color here. So let's go ahead and save this and refresh the page to see how this looks. If I resize the browser window here, it will cut off our images, and we'll fix that later on. But you can start to see our mobile website coming together. We have our footer here, and we have the header up at the top. There's still some spacing issues here and a lot of alignment issues, and like I said, the images are still entirely too large. There's a few problems here, but we're going to fix all of those things. The more you practice with fonts and typography properties in CSS, the better you'll get. It's important that you play with these as much as you can because good typography skills will help you a lot when building any web page. After a quick assessment, we'll style our portfolio.